The Baltimore Ravens ended their preseason with a blowout loss to the Green Bay Packers, and now they turn their attention to rounding out their 53-man roster. They have to get their roster cut down in the next few days. We talk about the tough decisions they have to make, who's in, who's out, and a lot more coming up next here on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here today. It is Sunday, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen each and every day. Are free and available for you all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube and audio form wherever you get your shows. So be sure to like, subscribe, follow along, however you prefer to watch and listen. We really appreciate it over here. For 5 days a week, Ravens content for you again, Monday through Friday. So we even do bonus episodes. We go live after every single Ravens game, after every single piece of Ravens big news. And we will be going live on Tuesday once the Ravens announce their final roster. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Well, the Ravens certainly ended their preseason with a fizzle-out performance. They lose 30-7 to the Green Bay Packers. We'll get into it throughout the show, but I feel like the bigger storyline here is we're just a couple days away now from the final 53-man roster being put out and the Ravens having to make all these decisions. And who knows how many have already been made, how many were made before the game started. But they still have, I think, a couple of more to make before this final 53 is finalized. And I today want to just dive into who's on, who's off, right? You're kind of talking about who's in, who's out, who's on, who's off, based off what we saw in this preseason. Did guys do enough? Who won positional battles? This isn't my final 53-man roster prediction in its entirety. That will be coming out tomorrow. So be sure to check that out. Tune into tomorrow's episode when I'll unveil my final 53 guys from position to position. We're still going to talk positions today, but it's more so, did a guy win a battle? Did he make the roster over another guy? Who should make the roster? So a really fun conversation today. We'll also, again, dive into the Ravens and Packers game a little bit, talk about final preseason winners and losers. And also, the Ravens might need a new running back. So we'll talk about that as well. But first, let's start off with the quarterbacks, because I think that was one of the bigger storylines of the day yesterday. Devin Leary was the one who got most of the action for Baltimore. Josh Johnson finished 5 of 7, had a long touchdown to Tylan Wallace, which was beautiful by all parties. Josh Johnson, the offensive line had great pass protection, and obviously Tylan Wallace on that play. But other than that, Josh Johnson, he did his job. Josh Johnson to me is on the roster. I think it would have taken a lot of bad for him not to be, and I think he's safe. Devin Leary, on the other hand, is the question mark for me. I honestly had him on my roster before. I wasn't a fan of the pick when it happened personally. It's nothing against Devin Leary, obviously. I just thought that the end of the draftable quarterbacks, that was Joe Milton. I thought Joe Milton was the last draftable quarterback. He could have gotten Devin Leary as an undrafted guy. The Ravens liked him enough and his arm talent enough to take him. But, I mean, at the end of the day, I wasn't a fan of the pick. And he hasn't really shown me enough to stay on the roster here. If you can get him through to the practice squad, that's great. But I would not put Devin Leary on the roster, because then you're not going to be able to maybe get another extra offensive lineman on the roster. Maybe you're not going to get an extra secondary member, extra outside linebacker. There is value in roster spots. Everyone is precious. And that's why teams do handshake deals. The Ravens will do handshake deals. We'll talk about that. But for me, Devin Leary goes 6 of 13, has 3 turnovers, one of which was not his fault, by the way. The fumble was not his fault. But he had 2 interceptions on very poorly placed, poorly timed throws. He was overthrowing guys. He was throwing guys off to the side, throwing behind guys. He had a couple of nice plays, but that's not enough to outweigh what ended up happening throughout the rest of the game. So I think Leary played himself off the roster. Again, would I be shocked if they ended up putting him on there? I mean, I guess not, but it's personally not what I would do. I would value an extra offensive lineman spot, extra edge spot, extra secondary spot, even extra wide receiver spot over Devin Leary right now. So I think Devin Leary is off the Ravens roster. I don't know what they're going to do at running back. This is just, it's an ever-flowing conversation, which we will dive a little more into in the final part of the show. But Owen Wright breaks his foot. He was the guy that I had penciled into that number 3 spot. Felt pretty obvious that he had outplayed Rasheen Ali. Ali has just not been on the field. That's another factor here. I expect Ali to be an IR stash for the year. Owen Wright, are they going to have to use a designated to return spot? Teams get 2 designated to return spots prior to the 53 being finalized. So is Arthur Millette and Owen Wright your 2 there that you end up putting in those spots? Because Owen Wright's injury is not a season-ending injury. It's obviously a really tough blow for him. You hate to see it for a guy that's worked so hard, performed so well. But to me, the Ravens have 2 rosterable running backs right now. 2. And it's Derrick Henry and Justice Hill. Keaton Mitchell obviously is not going to start the year playing football. When he's healthy, it'll be 3. I know there's been a conversation about other players they could bring in. That will be the conversation we talk about a little later. But if they don't, I think John Kelly probably makes the roster. He, out of all the running backs, him and Chris Collier both had decent days. I thought John Kelly had some nice bursts in there. I think he averaged 3.9 yards per carry on the day, while Collier had 3.6. I don't have the stats in front of me right now. I'm just kind of going off what I remember. But I think it's John Kelly who might have kind of found his way into a roster spot. But we'll get into that conversation a little more because there is more meat on the bone with that one. Wide receiver wise, this is one of the more, I would say, I don't even know what the word I want to use is. I guess interesting, because there are like 5 different ways this could go. Like literally. The guys who are 100% safe, there's no question in my mind that they'll be on the opening day roster. It's 3 guys. Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, and Nelson Aguilar. Those are your 3. Now, Tez Walker makes the roster one way or the other, right? He's not going to get released or cut. But do they IR stash him? I think there's a 5% chance of that happening. 95% he's on the roster. But 100% he's with the team. He didn't show a lot in the preseason. He, didn't show a lot during training camp either after being a stud during OTA's minicamp. I do not think they IR stash him. I think he'll be on the roster. Maybe he'll be a game day inactive for a lot of these games, and that's what it'll be. But 100% Tez Walker is on the roster. I think it's just a question of, do they IR stash him? I do not believe they do that. I know some people have been asking that question, so I just wanted to address that. But I think the other ways that this could go here, if we assume Tez Walker's on the roster, and I'm going to assume that, Deontay Hardy. He's a guy that they signed for their kick returns. We know that. He's going to have a minimal role, not no role, but a minimal role on offense this season. I think Tylan Wallace, we saw in real time, make the roster. I've said that. But is this the thing between Deontay Hardy and Dayton Wade potentially? Because Dayton Wade, in my opinion, if there was a question of anything, if they were to keep 7 guys, Dayton Wade would be that 7th guy. So do they keep 7 guys? Do they cut Hardy, and do they trust someone else back there to take their returns? There are multiple different ways that this could go, whether it is keeping 7, only keeping 6, and making a surprise cut / IR stash. There's a lot that could go into that, but I don't know. I don't think Dayton Wade passes through waivers. I think some other team grabs him and nabs him to be a back-end wide receiver on their roster. So that's the risk you run if you let Dayton Wade go. It's a tough decision. I really like Dayton Wade. I like his game a lot. I just feel like they keep 6 and Dayton Wade's not on the roster, which it pains me because I would love to see him on the roster. But it's going to depend because, again, if Devin Leary's not on, maybe Dayton Wade can get that 7th wide receiver spot, and they have the luxury to do that. So I think that battle was between Tylan Wallace and Dayton Wade for the 6th spot. I think Tylan Wallace won it. Dayton Wade, to me, won the 7th spot. But are they keeping 7? That is the big question. Tight end-wise, there is not a lot to talk about. They're going to keep 3 tight ends. And, that's what it's going to be. I thought Kadir Ismail did put together some strong practices, had a couple of nice catches in this Green Bay game. I think he is a top priority practice squad player. I think he has a lot of potential. I really like what he brings to the table. Is a bigger bodied player who has receiving chops and the athleticism too, and plus the frame and everything. I think he has it. I think a top priority practice squad spot for Kadir would be really, really, really good. And then I think that if Kadir Ismail does make that, if there's an injury to the tight end spot, Kadir Ismail can come up and make an impact. At least I think he could. But we know the offensive line is the biggest conversation point. So coming up the second part of the show, we'll talk about the offensive line, not only who's on and off the roster, but what's going on with these starting spots. Stay tuned. We got a lot to get to on the show. First, this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. For me, for a lot of other people, there are self-care non-negotiables. Maybe you never skip leg day or therapy day. When your schedule's packed with kids' activities, big work projects, and more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. Even when we know what makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it sometimes. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. And therapy has so many benefits, whether it's learning positive coping skills, how to set boundaries. It can empower you to become the best version of yourself. And it isn't just for those who've experienced major trauma. It's for everyone. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Fill out a brief questionnaire and get matched to a licensed therapist. Switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. We return our second segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostraker still here with you on this bonus episode edition on Sunday. Appreciate everybody taking some time out of your weekend here and making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. We've done a bunch of bonus episodes this weekend. We went live after the Ravens and Packers game. We did an instant reaction to that. Had a bonus episode on Lamar Jackson responding to his haters and his criticism, namely Julian Edelman. We're going to have a lot more. Again, we're going live on Tuesday after the Ravens' final roster is released. We're going to do an instant reaction to that. So be sure to turn notifications on YouTube for our live shows. And if you don't have those on, or if you want to watch or listen after the fact, they will be available for playback on YouTube and obviously in audio form as well after the fact. Now, offensive line is what everybody's talking about. It's my biggest concern on the roster. It's a lot of people's biggest concerns on the roster. I know I'm not alone in feeling this way. It was a better day in pass protection for the Ravens on Saturday than it was in the run blocking game. I think guys got manhandled at points in the run game. Pass protection, I thought that guys were better. Like, I thought Daniel Falele was actually pretty decent in pass protection. I thought that the run game for him it left some stuff to be desired. Same thing with Angel Voorhees. There were a couple of plays with him. Same deal. Roger Rosengarten, same deal. So do they end up playing Patrick McCary there as a vet at right tackle in week 1 and maybe a Ben Cleveland at right guard? Because we did see Daniel Falele get the start, but then Ben Cleveland came in later. Rosengarten played a lot of this game. He did. He played a lot. It's just going to depend how comfortable, because, again, you can't start slow if you're the Ravens. And if you feel like guys need time to get into the groove as young players and figure things out a little bit, if that costs you a couple games early, does that in December come back to bite you and you're fighting for a wild card spot instead of the division or something along those lines? So to me, I wouldn't be shocked if they went either way. I could see a younger group in Falele and Rosengarten. I could see the veteran pairing in McCary and Cleveland. I personally would go with the veteran pairing. It's not an indictment on Rosengarten. I think he's been fine this preseason. I don't think he's done anything wrong. But it just depends, because you're going up against a really solid bunch of defenses to start the season, and I think you would want some momentum. Now, the thing that they can't get too caught up in is, and I've talked about this and I'll stay true to it, is continuity. Because you don't want to be shuffling guys in and out for the entire season. It's going to be tough to establish that if that's what's going on. So that's the other thing they have to run into, where if they start Rosengarten and Falele and that's the combination they feel comfortable enough in, that gives them the added opportunity to add some continuity. But if guys are struggling, you got to bench them anyway. Guys are just moving in and out, and you just never know. So I would feel more comfortable probably in McCary Cleveland, but I have a feeling they'll go Falele Rosengarten, and I think that might be what we see here in week 1, and that is concerning. I mean, I think that by the time week 6, and Jake Luke and I talked about this last week, if by the time week 6 rolls around and if things aren't great there, you might have to reevaluate. But how much of a runway can you give these young guys? That's the biggest question to me. And in the preseason, We certainly saw some good, and we certainly saw some bad. Some of the bad, by the way, included Josh Jones, who had one of the worst miscommunications I've seen in a while. Definitely the worst of the preseason. I think he might get cut off of that alone. They need vets, though, so I wouldn't be shocked if he makes it in some way, shape, or form. But I'm not expecting too many surprises on the offensive line. Maybe there's an offensive lineman that gets cut that the Ravens are like, oh, wow, that's not expected. And they go and they scoop that guy up. But for guys like Salah and Nick Samek and all these other guys, I expect them all to make the roster. Not too many surprises I feel like are going to happen on the offensive line. Moving over to defensive line is same thing. No surprises. They're going to keep their core five. I expect them, again, to have 3 handshake deals all on the defensive side of the ball. Chris Board, inside linebacker. Brent Urban, obviously, on the defensive line. And Daryl Worley in the secondary. Those 3 guys you can have the handshake cut deals with. They don't have to pass through waivers. They can go to whoever they want. And they end up just coming back to Baltimore, which allows you to, again, that's 3 extra roster spots opened up for guys like potentially Dayton Wade or Joe Evans, who I thought played really, really well on Saturday. I thought he made a huge case for a roster spot. Bo Braid made a huge case for a roster spot. That's what those handshake deals can get you while you do your injured reserve maneuvering, PUP list maneuvering, getting guys on those lists after the fact so that then you can bring back other guys with those spots, but not subject your younger stars that start in the preseason to waivers. So I would expect that to happen. But as I mentioned, with that outside linebacker group, it's going to depend on how many Baltimore keeps, because right now it even could come down to what happens with Adisa Isaac. Is he going to go on IR? Is that a designated or return spot? Is that a full season? Is that a red shirt type deal? I don't know what it would be. But obviously, with Odafe Owe, Khaled Noe, David Ajabo, Tavius Robinson, those are your 4 locks. I'm expecting Adisa Isaac maybe to go on IR, and then maybe that opens a spot for Joe Evans. Even if Isaac is on the roster, I could see them keeping 6 now because Evans was that impressive, not only in this Packers game, but throughout the preseason. I think Evans is in. I think he's on the Ravens roster in some way, shape, or form. At least I would find a way to put him on there. Inside linebacker-wise, they might have to go a bit thin on the inside linebacker spot. Maybe that means Josh Ross does not make it. Chris Board, obviously, with the handshake deal there. Maybe they do only keep 3 and then they have handshake deals. So I wouldn't be shocked if it was potentially Roquan, Trenton Simpson, Malik Harrison, and then nobody else makes it initially and they bring a couple guys back after that just to get the roster spots open. Cornerback-wise, I think Pepe Williams played his way off the roster on Saturday. Again, I said it on the live stream. It's really unfortunate because you root for a guy like Pepe. You know, he's a great personality type of guy. You root for stories like him, but, you know, we can't ignore what we saw on the field. Missed tackles, got beat for a touchdown in the vicinity of multiple completions. They used him as a blitzer through the preseason. I thought he looked good in that role, but there are too many other guys competing for spots. And I don't think, especially with this performance, I just don't think Pepe did enough. And honestly, you know, with this performance, I think that just kind of pushed him off of the roster right now. So a guy like Bo Braid, you know, I think he better serves the spot. I think Sanusi Kane, he better serves the spot. Even Bump Cooper. I don't even think Bump Cooper is going to make the roster. I think they're going to lose Bump Cooper to waivers. But he did a lot of great things this preseason. This training camp is one of the stars and the standouts. I just think Pepe Williams is now very far down on the secondary list for Baltimore. They were already kind of filled up with the cornerback spot, and it was really for the safeties. And I think it was Pepe Williams, Bo Braid, and Sanusi Kane competing for 1, if not 2 spots. I think 2 spots probably is what it's going to end up being. And I think Sanusi Kane and Bo Braid are going to be the 2 that make it. I think Bo Braid's been awesome the entire preseason. Sanusi Kane plays with physicality to him. I mean, every single thing that those 2 did, I think warranted a roster spot. Obviously, they both had some down moments, but they've had a ton more of, oh, wow, that guy pops. And Pepe just didn't have that plus of the other negatives. So it's tough, but I'm leaving Pepe off of my roster right now. Obviously, I'm still going to have a day to think on it. So, you know, my final roster prediction will come out tomorrow. But that's kind of where I am with a lot of these positions. Ardarius Washington did not play in this Packers game. He was on the sidelines in street clothes. Really good sign for him. I mean, and he deserves it, honestly. Obviously, that what I'm alluding to is he has made the roster. That is a pretty big sign he's made it. So they're going to need him. Slot corner, safety depth, whatever it may be. With Arthur Millette down for however many weeks he'll be down, Ardarius is going to be a big part of that defense. So, again, plenty of tough. It's not only about the roster, who makes it, who doesn't, but just about where some of these other roles step in. Do they need one role more than the other? Is there a guy that they can get away with not having on their roster if they can keep a star from the preseason? Those are all things the Ravens are going to have to go through and look at because, they have to get it right. Because they don't have that veteran cushion anymore. They don't have it. The young guys are stepping up into bigger roles, and that means even younger guys are the depth pieces now. Whereas before it was vets, experience, and then the top young guys is kind of, this is a luxury depth guy. But the Ravens really have that a lot of a bunch of positions outside of tight end with Isaiah Likely, corner with Nate Wiggins, and a couple other spots as well. Defensive line is another, and there are a few others. But they don't have as much as they did last season. I think it showed in the preseason. And again, preseason, I'm not overreacting to the preseason and saying that, okay, the Ravens are done, their roster's terrible. That would be foolish of me. But the depth that they had this year is not the same that they had last year. It's just different. It's just different depth. So they're going to have to realize and figure out how to maximize that different depth. And the roster, I think, as such, will be built a little bit differently this season. Coming up, though, in the final part of the show, we'll talk more about some final winners and losers from the preseason. Also, we'll dive a little bit into that Packers and Ravens game because, again, big storyline from Saturday. And also, do the Ravens need another running back after Owen Wright breaks his foot? So be sure to stay tuned. A lot to get to on the show. First, this show is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. And for me, I've had a ton of great experiences over on LinkedIn, whether it's finding jobs, networking, connecting. LinkedIn has it all. And LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit or leaving job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn, plus 2.5 million small businesses who think them for hiring. Push your job for free at LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL. That's LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL to push your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We're back. Our final segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher here with you still on Sunday. Really appreciate everybody again for being here. We are almost to 8,000 subscribers on YouTube. Been chugging along here. So if you are watching in video form, if you wouldn't mind hitting that subscribe button, hitting that like button, really appreciate it. Helps out the show a ton and gets it in front of more Ravens fans as well in audio form. If you're listening over there, really appreciate you as well. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, follow button over there. And be sure to tell a friend, tell a family member if they're looking for daily 5 days a week of Ravens coverage. Be sure to send them over here our way. On Locked On Ravens, we'll have them covered every single day, plus the bonus content we do, of course. But let's talk a little bit about final preseason winners and losers. I think Trenton Simpson is a huge winner here. Played almost essentially all of the game on Saturday and did really well in his role. Had an interception, was flying around the field. I thought he was one of the standouts. I think there were questions about, okay, how is he going to kind of adapt to this new role full-time, going with the starters in the preseason, and he passed with flying colors. Nate Wiggins, I thought preseason-wise, obviously it was more so the Philly game than anything else. He did get some playing time on Saturday, but more so that Philly game was just a great audition tape, I guess, for the regular season. Even though he's injured now, I'm going to put Owen right there as well. I thought that he performed really well, and it's just unfortunate to see him go down. Dayton Wade, Tylan Wallace, Anthony Miller, even though, Miller didn't pop up on the stat sheet on Saturday, and neither did Anthony Miller. Not a lot of Ravens receivers did, but I thought Dayton Wade and Anthony Miller plus Tylan Wallace did a great job. I think on the defensive side of the ball, outside of Simpson and Wiggins, I mentioned Bump Cooper. I thought Bill Braid was one of the big winners. Brent Urban, I thought, had a decently solid preseason. Tavius Robinson, I thought, did a pretty solid job. David Ajabo, I thought, showed his stuff in the 2 preseason games that he played in. And there are others as well. There are others. I mean, I thought that there were, I guess on the defensive line, there was some stuff to be desired because of the run game. I think one of the biggest losers here is just the run game in general for both the offensive run game and the defensive run game. Both left something to be desired. A lot of inconsistency on both sides of the ball in that area. a little bit of a concern, but again, they didn't have their big guys out there. Their top guys out there. So I'm not putting too much stock into the preseason, but I'm not putting no stock into the preseason because some of these depth guys will have some level of a role, and maybe we'll have to fill in for an injured player. But again, I will say it's preseason, and I'm not one to hit the panic button just off of preseason alone. I take trends away from it, especially with the depth guys, and kind of put them in the back of my mind until they have to fill in or they are playing a big role on the team. So that's kind of where I am with the preseason. And speaking of that, we can talk a little bit more about the game on Saturday. Ravens lose 30-7 to the Packers, where again, I mentioned the Ravens. Looking at the stats now with sacks and everything involved, the Ravens had 79 yards of passing total in 4 quarters between Josh Johnson, Devin Leary, and Emory Jones. Josh Johnson accounted for all but 8 of those yards. Obviously, there was Devin Leary only accounted for 8 of them because of the sack that took away 28 of those yards. And then Emory Jones really only had one attempt in this game. He completed it. Chris Collier had the most carries in the game for the Ravens with 13, had 42 total yards. Tylan Wallace, again, was the only Ravens receiver over 14 yards in this game. Charlie Kohler was second on the team with 14 receiving yards. Tylan Wallace had that long 48-yard touchdown. Ravens had 4 turnovers on the day, that fumble on the miscommunication, 2 Devin Leary interceptions, and a Riley Sharp fumble. Bo Braid led the team with 8 tackles, followed by Sanusi Kane, Trenton Simpson with 6 apiece, Tavius Robinson, Malik Harrison, Joe Evans, and Tramel Walthor with 5 each. So, again, not a lot of positives to take away. I mean, the Packers diced up this Ravens defense. The offense couldn't get anything going. But again, there was no Lamar Jackson, no Jordan Love. You know, the stars weren't out for either team. So it was backups on backups. And you know what? Green Bay looks like has a little more depth than Baltimore does at this point. But let's finish it up here with the running back conversation. I promised we'd talk about it later. We are now later. So let's talk about it. With Owen Wright out, Rasheen Ali, I don't know what's going on. I would assume he's an IR stash. You're going to have to find a way to get somebody in here who can play running back as the third, whether that is a Chris Collier or a John Kelly, if you feel comfortable enough with either of those guys who have been with you, or if there's a guy that gets cut, because again, there are a lot of teams that are going to cut a good running back, someone that could go and play number 3 running back for Baltimore before Keaton Mitchell comes back. You could also go out and sign some available running backs, Dalvin Cook, Jerick McKinnon, Kareem Hunt, Melvin Gordon, Latavius Murray, Eno Benjamin. There are a few others in there as well. Marlon Mack. I know everybody's saying Dalvin Cook. I don't know how that relationship is, if we're being honest. Not that I'm not saying I know anything, but my assumption would be it's probably not great, because I would assume that Dalvin signing with the Ravens for this playoffs, right, wanted an opportunity. The Ravens probably said, hey, we're going to do this for you. And Dalvin was like, hey, let's go. Sign me up. And then he barely had a role in the playoffs when he was looking for a role in the playoffs. And I think Dalvin's off the table. If I were to guess, I think Dalvin's off the table. I do not think he wants to come back to Baltimore. So is Jerick McKinnon somebody? He can be a third down back for you, but they like Justice Hill in that role. Do they sign somebody to be more of a vet running back and then they move Justice Hill back to special teams? Because the third running back spot would be someone, I think, who would play some level of special teams. But if you want to move Justice Hill back there, you have to have somebody who can play number 2 running back, or at least split those running back 2 duties with Justice Hill before Keaton comes back. Once Keaton comes back, Justice goes more to special teams. But before Keaton comes back, I would assume that the Ravens would want to play Justice more at running back and less on special teams. And then the number 3 running back would be the special teams guy. So I don't know what they're going to do, but they might just have to play Justice double duty a little more now and then bring in another player. But that's one of the biggest things I'm going to be monitoring is the running back position, because we know Keaton's not going to be back for a little while. So they have to have somebody fill in the cracks until Keaton is able to return. So plenty of decisions ahead for this Baltimore Ravens team, and we'll be tracking it down to the wire here on Locked On Ravens. That's all I have for you today on Locked On Ravens. Again, we'll be back here tomorrow with my final 53-man roster prediction, 1 through 53, position by position. We'll be going through it, so be sure to stay tuned for that. Plus, on Tuesday, we'll be going live. Not only our 6 a.m. episode, obviously, that'll be regularly scheduled, but we're going live in the afternoon whenever the Ravens release their 53-man roster. We'll be going live talking about that in an instant reaction episode. So be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel here on YouTube, follow along, subscribe in audio form for your 5 days a week Ravens content. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.